All right, everybody. Welcome to the 2021 Virtual Christmas Summit brought to you by Boscoyo Studio. This presentation is sponsored by Build a Light Show. As a reminder, please don't unmute yourself or interrupt the presenter, and feel free to put any questions or discussion in the chat throughout the session. We'll open it up for Q&A at the end. This is Advanced Tips and Tricks from a Sequencing Junkie Part 1, presented by Michael Stavrogin. In this class, we will dive into advanced tips and tricks to make your sequences really pop. And with that, Michael, you are off and running.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody who's here this afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and get started. This was going to be a little bit unusual in that it's designed to go across two different sessions. So the pacing will be a little bit unusual. Some things I'll go through very quickly. Other things I'll go more in depth for you. Give you a little background on me. I am the primary sequencer for Showstopper sequences. A typical workload for me in a given year, I'll work on about 40 to 50 sequences every year. A lot of the stuff I do, you never see because it's commercial work. I say you never see it. You never see it in our store because starting around the end of August until about the middle of November, I'm doing primarily commercial sequencing at that time. So I started sequencing with Lightorama in 2006. And so I've been sequencing now, I guess, for a little over 15 years. And so I've run across a few things that have made my life a lot easier, made me a little more efficient, a little more effective, and hopefully we can, I can share those things with you. I do think some of them are worthwhile. Now, what I will tell you is we're going to cover stuff. Like I said, some of it's going to be pretty quick, but what I did was I broke it up into categories: the environment, layouts, timing, mark, sequencing, and if we have time, I'll show you how to do singing faces. And if you follow the technique I use, you can do an entire singing face, the entire song, 3-minute song in less than 3 hours, which is pretty quick. Now, I call this advanced stuff. It may not be advanced to you, but that just means either I'm slow or you're fast. I don't know which one it is, but that's basically what it boils down to. All right. Now, I started, like I said, in 2006. A little bit of background on me. I love to make, fix, and create things. When we were growing up, our family would get together and we would always do some sort of craft or hobby or something like that. What's really strange about me and doing this is I can't sing, I can't play an instrument, I can't dance. I have literally no musical abilities other than I can recognize different instruments when I'm listening to them. So it's kind of, so I guess you can, the message there is you can sequence even though you might not have the skills that you think you need, that sort of thing. All right, so I'm going to start off with a list here. And these are things that I do, things that have made my life a little bit easier. Hopefully, if you look at them, you got to kind of take them with a grain of salt. Maybe it's not appropriate for what you do, but these are all things that I have found to be really, really helpful. All right, the first thing I want to talk about is your master view. Now, your master view is the one that ultimately determines where things, the render order. I'll show you what I do every time I start a sequence. All right, let's go up here. We're going to file. We start a new sequence. Let's just do an animation for right now. I'm going to do it at 40 frames per second. I'm telling them I'm done. Now I've just got a little sequence here. Very first thing I do, you'll see here I'm in my master view. I'll right click. I go to edit display elements, and then I'm going to look at my view. Now, my view is a view that I have created that has everything in it, but it's got it in a specific order. Now, I have all my models and submodels and things like that numbered. The reason why I have them numbered is simply because it makes it a little easier to follow when somebody comes to our layout and looking at it at the first time. Numbers are sometimes a little bit easier to understand than just what than just words. For example, looking at the icicles, all icicles, that's 1.70, but the icicle tips, which is a sub to the group of icicles, it's a 1.7.1. Okay, it just follows it's some logic. But what I do to control my master is after I select my view, I tell it to make it the master. Now, the reason why I do that, if you're like me, you kind of add models as you go along and you keep using the same master file, and your master file gets kind of jumbled over time. In other words, things get added to the end, not necessarily in the order that you want them rendered. All right, so by taking the my view and making it the master view, all right, it gives me the same result every time when it comes to rendering. So I'm going to get out of that. And if you'll go over here and you'll look and see the master view, now it's numbered, whereas before it was not numbered. Now, if I come over to my view, you'll see no change. Why? Because they're identical. All right, another thing that we're going to go now to number 2, tailoring your perspective to your task. Now, your perspective, okay, if you go over here and you look, your perspective, you can create different perspectives. You can save it as a new, that sort of thing. But I'll give you a good example of how I will do it sometimes. Now, when I'm doing like a lyric track, when I'm doing a lyric track, I'm not doing color, I'm not doing the effect, I'm not doing layer blending, I'm not doing any of those things. So I'm just going to take that and put it up like that. Now I've got a little fewer distractions. All right, another thing that you can do is tailor your view to your task. For example, there's only a few places where I might have singing faces. So if I come down here and change it to lyrics, okay, now all I've got are the mega tree. I've got a 16 by 50 in our layout, a 32 by 80 in our layout, a large matrix, and a tune to sign. Those are the 4 areas where I'll do it. But if you look at it now, my work area is very clean. And when I'm focusing on the lyric tracks, I don't have all these side words and symbols and things like that that are a distraction. So in other words, I can go in here and I can focus in on the task at hand. Now you can do that with lyric tracks, but you can break it up however you want when you go in and create your views. All right, the way you go in and create your views, you right click, edit your display elements. You can take something like your My View, clone it, rename it, and then let me see, let's go ahead and I'll do that. I'll clone it, and I'm going to just call these snowflakes. Okay, now I'm going to take everything here, and just to start, I'm just going to delete it all over to the side. And then I can go through and find everything that is a snowflake or relates to a snowflake, just highlight it, and then bring it over. In the interest of time, I'm not going to do that for everything. But then when I come over here and I'm focusing in on my sequencing, and I'll drag this back down here so I've got those things that I can look at. All right, now I know that I'm just sequencing snowflakes. What's really neat is, the way that Xlights handles everything is just a matrix. And when you're doing like anything that is a snowflake and you're sequencing, you can start adding in things that are also circular. For example, you have wreaths that you can add in. You can add in some of the high density wreaths, some of the high density props. You can add in stars. In other words, you can make this where you're sequencing everything that has a similar shape. And the reason why you do that is because it will help you sequence and focus in on what's happening with the snowflakes and the stars and all those things that are similar shaped, so that you can, in some instances, duplicate what you've got, and in some instances, make sure that you're not doing the same thing. So that's an example of customizing your view to the task that you're going to have. Now here's another one that is kind of interesting because I don't think a lot of people do this, but it's really a good idea. Now, when you select a palette, that is the colors that you're going to use, you'll notice over here there's a series of palettes. There's some that are built in, like your orange, your pink, your purple, you've got your red, you've got your green. One of the things, though, that you can do is you can actually name your palettes. All right, the way that you do that, you're going to do that outside of Xlights. Easy way to do it, you just go into your Explorer. You will go to wherever you're working. I've got it here. Working in this one right here. This is my show directory for right now. And you go into the palettes, and you can take any palette and you can give it a name. Now, for example, this one is the Cozy 2 palette. That's from Cozy Little Christmas. Favorite time is from a sequence I did, my favorite time of the year. Down here is Wonder Woman. And all you do is you right click and you rename the palette. Okay, so you can rename it whatever you want. And then that way, here's my problem. All right, when you work on a lot of sequences, I may not remember which palette I necessarily used, but when you tie it to a sequence and the look feel of that sequence, then I can go back and do that. Again, that's one of those little strange things that I do that probably not very many people do, but it's just a handy tip that you can do to kind of keep track of when you come across a really cool color combination, you want to do that. It's really helpful, for example, like in the Cozy palette. Let me show you this one. All right, when I come over here and I select the Cozy palette, all right, you'll notice here that I've got a silver and I've got 3 different shades of gold. All right, well, those are not innate colors. So what I had to do is go in and create custom colors for the RGB. And the easiest way to do that, I'll show you, you can go online anytime. And when you go online, look up the RGB values of like a color. Now here are the RGB values. See if I can make this big enough so it's easier to read. There we go. Okay, you can find this online. Just look up the RGB values of certain colors and you can go in, you create that custom color, and then you save the palette. And then, later on, I really like the gold that I used in that. I can go back in and select that palette and use those. So you can create it. And by naming the palette, you don't necessarily have to remember the number that's associated with it. All right, a few things that I'll talk about that kind of relate to what platform are you sequencing on? For example, if you'll go up to File and Preferences, get a big long list of things that you have here. A couple of things that I'll point out on the view. Let's say you are going to use a laptop. Well, with a laptop, you have a very limited screen unless you're using a docking station and multiple monitors and things like that, which is quite possible. But usually when I'm on a laptop, I'm traveling. So I don't necessarily have access to my multiple screen setup. So what I'll do is I will set it up so that certain things will toggle. That is, they only pop up when they're needed. The Effect Assist window, and also the Auto Show House Preview. Now what that does when you click the Auto Show House Preview is that it's not going to pop up until you actually hit play up here on the top. All right, so what you'll want to do if you're working on a notebook is go ahead and try to make things as friendly as you can by doing some of those toggle things. Another thing that you might want to be careful of, for example, is you may want to manage where you keep your render cache and your FSEQ folders. Here's why. If you are using, let's say, like a Dropbox for your sequences, the reason why you do that is because, say, you're switching from a notebook computer to a desktop back and forth. Well, if you start saving your render cache and your FSEQ, if you put all those in your show directory, which is sitting on that, you've got a lot of data transferring back and forth. The render cache and your FSEQ files are your biggest files. And so as a result, you may want to manage those when you have that sort of thing. Another thing that I always do when it comes to sequencing is I always snap to timing marks. The reason why I do that is because, well, you know, being commercial, I want to make sure that everything is precise. So I will put in the timing marks, click the snap to timing marks, and it makes it easier for me to make sure that an effect will start and stop at the appropriate time. Another thing that's very important, and you know, it relates to your backup. You want to back up when you launch or when you save. It doesn't really matter. The other thing that you want to do is you want to do your autosave. I've got mine set for every 3 minutes. Now, the reason why I do that is because when you're working on something, you've been working on it a while, last thing you want to do is a crash and lose a bunch of work. About 3 minutes, I can easily recreate, so that doesn't bother me too much. Now, another one that I will play with, and I toggle this one off and on, is render on save. When I am sequencing, I will shut this off. The reason why is because I will frequently hit Control S to save. And rather than having to wait for it to render each time, I know that I'm saving the effects and the commands that I just entered. And then I can manually render using the command up here, the little palette that you see. I can manually render when I want it to be rendered. And that makes it a little bit easier. So when you're sequencing, shut off the render on save. Okay, I've already talked about using the Dropbox. Another thing, number 12 on the list here, if you're looking at the tips and tricks, upgrade the software. If it doesn't work, just go back to the previous version that you were using. The reason why I say that is sometimes I'll have people say, you know, I just couldn't get that effect to work the way that yours does. Well, yeah, you're in 2017 and they've added some features since then. All right, so go ahead and upgrade the software. If it doesn't work for you, if it's crashing, if there's something going on, just downgrade, just go back. I just recently did it. You know, 2021 10 was crashing on me. I just went back to 9, no big deal. Didn't cause any problems. So don't be afraid to upgrade. And if you need to, just go back a generation or to your last one that's working. Another thing I've got in there is to stop upgrading. You'll notice now that I'm on 2021.09. That's the version I'm using right now for this. Reason why, like I said, I had my little experience with 2010. Really haven't had a lot of time to play with 2011 to see if it was going to crash on me. So I quit upgrading because I knew I was going to be doing this presentation today. Well, the same is true when you get close to show time. You're going to need to find a version of the software that you're comfortable with. There is no magic formula because everybody's show and everybody's hardware is different, but you're going to want to stop upgrading unless, and this is important, you want to stop upgrading unless there is something that is fixed that's causing problems in your show. In other words, if you're having something that's lagging, something that's crashing, you're experiencing a problem and they've fixed it with an update, go ahead and update it by all means. But I usually stop, I want to say around November. Because my show starts December 1st. I'll stop upgrading in November, find a version that I'm real comfortable with. And once the season's over, we go through the Epiphany, January 6th. Once that's over, I'll go ahead and upgrade and start using the new version from there. But like I said, I'll stop unless it's fixing a problem that I'm having. Another thing that I do, and this relates, again, this is something that may not work for those of you that are trying to get, your audience participation, things like that. I isolate my show network and computer from the internet completely. So starting in November, I take it off our local, Wi-Fi router. I put it on my show network and use that exclusively. That way I don't have any problems with Windows updates. I don't have any issues with something weird going on. So you isolate your show network and computer. All right, now we're gonna start getting into the layout. Let me get out of this here. I'm gonna go to my layout. And one of the things I will have to tell you is you've got to create groups. Here's why. When you go to sequence something, let me just drop an effect in here. And I'm just going to drop that on snowflakes. And I'm going to put it per model default. I'm going to make it red and gold, maybe some white. Make it a little bit thick so you can see it. Okay, if you go to my house preview, all right, you see now I've got this just rotating here. All right, so I've got that set to per model default as the render style. But look at all the different render styles you have when you're in a group. Okay, you can make it a single line. You can, set it up as a pixel. One thing that's really kind of cool is that you make it for example, the default model is a pixel. Now all of a sudden you see it's doing that little thing. Well, if you can increase the number of arms so you got more variety, slow it down so it's not so crazy, make it 3D so we get a little variation. Now you got a nice little twinkle effect. All right, if it wasn't in a group, all right, here's what would happen. I would simply have the default, the per preview, and the single line options. But when things are in a group, you get so many more options that's going to give you a different look when you're doing your sequencing. So that's why putting things into a group is important. So if you can, go in and create groups. For example, these snowflakes that I've got here, I've got roof snowflakes. I've got snowflakes that are grouped as under the arches. I've got these smaller snowflakes on top of the garage. I've got these two living light show snowflakes that are grouped together. All right, so you can group them together and you can do different things with those groups. And I've got a group that is all the snowflakes put together. So create groups. The groups are going to help you. They're also going to make things a little bit better for you in general. Now, another one, and this is something that I did a little video on, and so I will touch on it because I think it's a great way. And I'll tell you how I came up with this. I would see people who would take one of my sequences where I took an effect and I had it focused in on the starburst. Now the starburst is this star right here, kind of about almost in the direct center of the layout. So anyway, I would have an effect focused there, and what I would do with that effect, say it's a starburst or a fan effect, what I would do is I would manipulate the X and the Y coordinates of that effect so that the center of the starburst, where my cursor is pointed right now, the center was the center of the screen. All right, so I would put that sequence out there, and then I would look at people's renderings and they would have the effect on their whole house, but the focal point would be at where I had put the center and not on the focal point of their display. So what the focal point group does, and I call them an FPG starburst. Okay, if you will look at this, the focal point here, I've got everything in my display except for the starburst itself. And I'm going to zoom in here, get that centered. And if you'll notice that the center, that little crosshatch, I manipulated that by manipulating the X and the Y variables right here on the left side. So you'll see the X center offset is 137, the Y center offset is 920. That gives me the center of that right there. Now, here's what that does for you. Let me get back over here to our little example. I'm going to go back to just my view. Here's our FPG starburst is right there. Now, let me go ahead and I'm going to take a fan effect. I'm going to drop it in there. I'm going to stretch it out a little bit. Go to the options, make it full. I'm going to reverse it. I'm going to make it 16 blades. I'm going to make the width of those blades about 10 or so. I'm going to take the angle off of it because I want it to be straight. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase radius 2. Okay, and you'll see now that that right there, the focal point, the center of that effect, let me change it a little bit. We'll just make it white. The center of that effect is the center of the starburst. Now contrast that if I take it to everything but the starburst. Now I just selected the FPG starburst effect. I'm just going to use the arrow up and move it to everything but the starburst. Okay, now it's on the center of the house. If I move it back down, now it's centered on that item. The neat thing about the FPG focal point group groupings is it can be anything. For example, if you wanted to, you could come over here and you can make the star a focal point group for these other stars. Okay, I'm going to highlight these other stars here. I got my vertical, didn't want my vertical. All right, so, and then I'm going to take this one off. Now I've got all these others, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a group, and I'm going to call that the FPG Megatree star. Okay, now I can put something on the Megatree star and I can put something on these others that calls attention to that. I can add the Megatree even to that and the mini trees, however you want to set it up. But now I've created a focal point group where that star, even though it's not included, will be the focal point of the effect that I put on that grouping. So the FPG groups is kind of an interesting concept. I encourage you to do that on your own. It'll save you a lot of time, particularly if you find yourself, oh, I'm always having to modify the X and Y of this coordinate. I mean, you can make anything the focal point. It could be this matrix. It could be the Megatree star. It could be the Rosa wreath that's here on the center of the garage. It's whatever you want it to be. But what it's going to do is it's going to change the way that the effects look when they're applied. So the focal point groups are important. Now, another thing that you can do in your layout that might help you, and I will go ahead and kind of highlight this, is that you can create multiple previews if you like. Okay, let me come down here and I'm going to select oh, let me see, I'll come down all the way and pick my GE Rosa wreath. I can find it. There it is. Okay, now you'll see that the Rosa wreath is currently in all previews because I've just got one preview. But you could create separate previews. For example, if you wanted to create a preview for just your garage, or if you wanted to create one, if you're located on a corner lot, you've got kind of the left side and the right side of your house, you can create separate previews. Again, I just use one preview. I'm in the middle of a cul-de-sac. That's kind of where I'm at. And so it's not something that I use. When we do commercial sequencing, you would be surprised how important those previews are, because a lot of times each little display that as you're going through the drive-through might be broken up into a preview, like a candy land or a tree forest or whatever, and those previews become important. Now, when you're in the sequencer, you can go up here to the view and you can select show all. When you're doing a drive-through, what that allows you to do is look at the entire drive-through at one time. The other thing that you can do is if you're just doing your house, the left and right side, or front yard, backyard, or if some people who do multiple houses, you can look at all those houses at the same time by selecting the show all. Now, I'm not set up for that right now, but you know, that's an option that you have. So sometimes if your situation calls for it, setting up multiple previews can be very helpful in looking at how the whole thing works together. All right, now another thing that I want you to think about doing is creating a submodel on just about everything. Here's why. Submodels allow you to do some really, really neat things. Let me delete that since we're going to be talking about something else. Let me come over here and I'm going to create some timing marks. I'm just going to go in here and just put them all in here. All right, very good. So now let me drop in something here on our snowflakes. I'll put in a pinwheel. We're going to make it per model default. We'll increase the number of arms to 6. We'll increase the thickness. Give it an additional color, red and white. We're going to reverse it, make it 3D. Okay, now we've got a little thing like that. I'm going to drop the thickness down a little bit because I want some other things going on. Okay, now let's come over here and I'm going to drop in a VU meter on the tips. Now the tips are a submodel of the snowflakes. I'm going to drop that in there. I'm going to come over and I'm going to select the timing event pulse color. And the color I'm going to pulse, I'm just going to pulse a gold. And we are going to do it to the new timing. All right, so now when we look at this, stretch that over there so you can see it happening. Now we've got something happening. And when it comes to the various timing marks, we'll get a flash of that gold. Let me do this so you can see it a little better. I know sometimes things do not translate well. All right, but you can see now that when it actually gets to that, we've got a pulsing that's to the rhythm, if you will, the timing marks that we have. So that's one of the things that you can do with submodels. Give you a couple examples here. Let me go to my layout. Now, these snowflakes right here are Boscoyo snowflakes. They're the standard 24-inch 3-prong fancy. Now, what I've done is I've gone in and I've created some submodels. Okay, the submodels that I've created I've created tips. Now you'll see I've got them here, a top, line 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then the bottom. If you actually go down and click on those, you'll see that it goes all the way around. I've also done the same thing with the arms. I also created a submodel for the center. Now that gives me 3 different things to play with on a model that when you download it and you put it in your display, it has absolutely no submodels associated with it from the standard layout. But you can go in and you can create those very easily. It gives you something more to play with when you're doing your sequencing. That way things can look a little bit different. Let me show you another one. This one is kind of neat because when we go in, oh, let me find it real quick. Candy canes, okay? This is the standard 99 pixel candy cane. But look at the different submodels that you can add to it. You can add a center, you can do the outline, and you can have those bouncing back and forth doing different things. But here's another thing is I've also added a candle, which is basically a pixel pole. And then at the top of the pixel pole, I've added a flame. So now when I do a slow song, instead of just having a candy cane, I can create a nice effect by putting an effect on the flame and putting an effect on the candle. And instead of just having the candy canes, I've got a candle now that I have. Real easy thing to do with a candy cane. So submodel. Another thing that you want to do is after you create your submodels, group them together. Okay, here's why. You'll see here I've got a sub with the snowflake tips. And you can kind of see it here. They're highlighted in yellow. This one is every snowflake tip that I submodeled, I put it together. Reason why is now instead of having to go in and put something on each individual snowflake, those snowflake tips are now in a group. And same thing with the stars and the same thing with the snowflake arms. All right, I can put effects on those because I've taken the submodels and grouped them together. Now here's another little thing that I do that may not really apply to what you do. Let me get over here to the sequencer tab and I will show you. If you notice at the top, I've got a little line here that says entire display. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see another one that has asterisks leading in that's called left yard. If you scroll down a little bit, got another one that says garage. A little bit further down, I've got one that says right house. Let me show you how I created those. Go back to the layout. And I'm going to shrink this down. And you'll see here, there are a series of null pixels. We get down to the bottom. What I did is at the end, I just added these things. The first one, let's say the entire display, you'll see it. It's just basically a null pixel that I added to the end. I named it entire display, and it's simply a divider. The reason why I have that in there is when you're looking at a large number of models and submodels, if they are divided up in some way, it makes it easier to find. So for me, that is simply just, it makes it a whole lot easier to scroll through a whole lot of models and find the area where I'm wanting to sequence. Okay, I call those dividers. They're just null pixels that you stick at the end. Even if you accidentally sequence to them, nothing's gonna happen. So it's a way to help you organize the models that you have placed there. All right, now I want to talk about timing marks. All right, when you talk about synchronizing synchronizing a sequence, well, you know, if you think about it, that's all you're doing is you're trying to find the appropriate timing marks. And I started out originally not doing anything but beats, and maybe some note onsets using the Queen Mary vamp plugins. And I found that timing marks can really help you sequence. And sometimes you may think, well, it's getting out of hand, but not necessarily. Let me open up a sequence for you here. This is, I am going to actually change, I am going to change my directory to where I keep my actual show. A lot of people look at ours and they say, well, I really like the Whoville version that you had before. And I still have that. That's actually our layout, is this one right here. The one that we have on our website is one that we made just for commercial purposes. Our actual layout looks more like this. And I am going to call up a sequence. Carol of the Bells by August Burns Red. Now, this is a rock and roll version of Carol of the Bells, but it's a real good way to illustrate using timing marks. Now, the first thing that I always do when I go in and create timing marks is I try to create a structure for the sequence. It's not exactly what you would think the structure is. I will tell you about how 80% of all Christmas sequences go. They start out with an intro, then you have the first verse, the chorus, the second verse, the chorus. They have a breakdown of some sort. You have the third chorus, the third verse, and then from there, you will either have the chorus going into the outro or just go right from the third verse into the outro. That's just how they're structured. Don't know why, but if you'll pay attention to it, that's kind of how they are. Now, there's variations, but for the most part. So, if you did that and just went in, you could pretty well pick those major components. But when I create a structure, what I think of is, okay, at what point do I want to change the look of the sequence? That's what determines the structure for me. I will start out with, and I'll just do it here. You see this one, you see where the structure is. These are the points where I plan to change the sequence. You'll notice here, music stops. So I've got a gap here that'll help me later on with the sequencing. But look at the number of timing marks that I put in. First one I put in was drums. Okay, so those are some of the drums that are associated with it. This song has also some bells. That's where the bells worked out in this one. For lack of a better word, I put in some things that are the melody. And these other two, the beats and the 250 millisecond metronome, are generated. Okay, but when you look at it, look at all the timing marks that get added to that song. Now, will I use all of them? I don't know until I start sequencing, but they're there if I need them. All right, so do not hesitate to create timing marks because they are your friend and they will help you do a better job. Now, kind of a corollary with that, that's number 20. Create your sequence at 40 frames per second. Now, a lot of people will tell you 20 is fine, and it is. There's no issues with that. But when you are creating your sequence, I have found it's easier to hit the timing marks at the 40 frames per second. Later on, you can play it at 20. Your hardware will automatically downgrade for you if it needs to. But I found sequencing, for sequencing purposes, particularly if you're doing lyric tracks, the 40 frames per second works a lot better. If you're going to do timing marks, get yourself a good set of headphones. When I sequence, I will use headphones. And the reason why I do that is because it kind of eliminates all the background noise that interferes. Plus, with a good set of headphones, you're going to hear things that you've never heard before. And things are going to jump out at you that people may not even notice when they're listening to the music, but they will notice it when you tie something to that element with your structure. All right, now I want to talk about something that probably this may be the first time you've seen this, but man, it is amazing the difference that it can do. Let me change this back to where my work is, the VCS 2021. That's the folder. And I don't know if you've ever noticed, but like when you're sequencing, let me call this up for you. I'm gonna create a sequence, and I put together just portions of a dubstep. Go to my audio files. This is just dubstep that I found and put it together. Do it 40 frames per second. I'm done. All right, so now I won't play the full thing for you, but you can kind of get some idea. Here is the hope you could hear that okay. Here's the second song. Okay, Jingle Bells. Up here on the waveform, if you will right click on the waveform, and I'm going to select the bass waveform. All right, now you'll notice here that there are some definite lines that jump out at you. I'm going to play this, and it's not going to be very loud because everything's muted except for the bass waveforms. Okay. I said, I don't know if you can hear it, but I know whether you can hear it or not. I know I can go in here and I can start putting in some timing marks. They're going to match up with the bass. Okay, and all I'm doing is lining it up, hitting the T. I don't even have to listen to the music. Why? Because the waveform shows me where those are located. I'm going quick, so they might be just a little bit off on one or two. I apologize for that. But all right, so now you can kind of see what we've done by changing over to the bass waveform. All right, I'm going to go back now. I'm going to right click on the waveform. I'm going to go to the raw waveform and go in. I'm just going to select this right here. Okay, so you can see we're hitting the major beats when we real easy way to go in and create a timing track based on the way that the music actually sounds. Now, you can also do the same thing with the treble waveform in some instances. You'll see here that there are treble, but a lot of these match up with the other timing tracks that I put in. So I wouldn't necessarily have to go back in and do anything. We'll look at the alto waveform. Again, it's basically just a lot of sound being thrown at you, particularly on the Jingle Bells one. And another thing that you can do is kind of neat is the non-vocals. The non-vocal waveform I have found is very, very helpful when you're doing the lyric tracks for the backup singers. Here's why. The backup singers are usually not on the same channel as the main singers. So I haven't played this, but okay, little garbled. We don't have any backup singers there. Okay, a lot of sound being thrown at you. That's why the waveform goes off. But I want to point out to you now, you can use these different waveforms to create different timing tracks. And it's a quick way to do it, because if you look here, when you're just looking at the raw waveform, sometimes it's hard to pick out exactly where it's peaking at. But when you do the base waveform, it just jumps out at you. So that's a real good thing to know how to use. So use the waveforms. Now, this kind of relates back to something I've said previously, creating a my view. Now, if you do a master view, and I'm going to add in another timing track here. I'm going to add in a timing track. I'm going to just do the bar and beat tracker bars. Just call it that. Okay, so now I've got a different set, a timing track that I can look at. If I went in and added one, let me rename this one to waveform. Let me add a timing track. We'll just call it structure. And we start where we started at. We started right here. And we know this one's going to go to about right over here. Final timing over here. All right, that just gives us kind of a little bit of a structure. It's two separate songs. I really haven't broken it up much. But what's kind of neat now, if I go in, let's say add another timing track, and we're going to make it the bar and beat tracker. We're just going to make it the beats. Okay, if I'm in my master view, I have to pick one or the other. In other words, it's not going to let me have multiple timing tracks selected at a time. But since I know my view is identical, I can switch over to my view, add those timing tracks into my view. And I can now, if you look here, I've got the structure and the beats selected together. Now, let me give you an example of why something like that might be helpful, might be handy. I've got my general structure. Let me select the waveform. I'm going to take the beats off here. And I'm going to go down to my arches. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to put in the VU meter on the arches. Like that right there. And on that effect, on that VU meter, I'm going to select the timing event alternate timed sweep. Now, what that does is it's going to create a bouncing lights back and forth. I'm going to change that to per model default. Okay, now it's bouncing back and forth to the waveform. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and play this, and you can watch the arches. I'm going to call these up, make it a little bigger so it's easier to see. I'm going to increase the size of it so it's a little bigger. And now when I hit play, let me change back to the raw waveform. Okay, very easily, I just added in some motion on the arches that will bounce back and forth to the waveform. It's an easy way to do things. If I don't want it that way, I can take that same thing. Let me move it down. I'm just going to cut and paste it. Let me cut and paste it down to my snowflake tips and take it from the timing event alternate sweep. Let's do timing event pulse color. And now, when we look at the model preview, okay, that's kind of cool. We'll do that. And then now let's take it and take that same thing. Let's copy it and we'll paste it over to our center stars. But with the center stars, I'm going to change that to, now we're going to do it to the beats. And we're going to change the colors up a little bit. I'm going to change it to silver and gold. So when we do that, looks like it's going to want me to render it a little bit. All right, I'm going to change that from normal to layered. We should be getting both of them. Again, that's one of those things. All right, not participating today. That's okay. But anyway, the idea is that you could do both of those things at the same time. Let me take that up to the snowflakes. Now we're getting somewhere. All right, you can see that it's flashing not only the basic color on the snowflakes, but we're getting the highlights. All right, so it's an easy way to add variation to your sequencing just using the VU meter. The VU meter is very, very handy from that perspective. All right, so by having my view, I can have both the waveform and the structure at the same time. And one thing I will tell you is that the waveform will take precedence over the lower timing marks. So if I put in beats there, for example, if I want to go in here and maybe use some sort of value curve, let me put something that uses value curves in there. I'm going to change it from the VU meter to, oh, let me say a pinwheel. And I go in to the pinwheel itself, and I'm going to play with the speed, let's say. All right, you'll notice that here, when we go in to play with the speed, these timing marks are not the beats, the ones that, where there's multiples. It is the waveform. Okay, let me cancel that out. I'm going to take off the waveform and the structure. And now if I go into the speed, you'll see that it has the beats timing marks that are in there. All right, so that's important because when you want to manipulate what something's going to do, like the speed, you may want to tie it to those individual timing marks. And the easiest way to do that, of course, is just change it to custom. We're going to take it from there, from the and we're just going to start manipulating, matching the timing marks. So it's going to speed up, slow down, speed up, slow down, speed up, slow down, all the way through. But it's going to do it to the timing marks that we've created. I'm going to match that one up there. Make that a little thicker so you can see it. And you'll notice that when this goes through the process, when you're playing it, you'll see that the spinning was tied to the timing marks that we used, which was the beats. So that's something that you can do. It ties your sequence in together, makes it look very cohesive because you're actually getting to the music itself. So just to kind of recap that area there, use the waveforms, use my view instead of the master view, add bars and beats, just come up with every type of timing mark that you can. Another thing that you want to do is you want to actually listen to the music. I'm going to call up another song here. This is one that I just finished, and there's several versions. Yes. Okay, that's great. I appreciate that. Let me see where we're at time-wise. I appreciate you giving me a heads up on that. I will mention I will be in the sponsor room tomorrow at 2:30. So if you got questions, don't hesitate to come in and ask questions